all seen Zac Efron's new premiere role in Iron Claw.
Pop tried to protect us with wrestling. He said if we were the toughest, the strongest, nothing could ever hurt us.
He looks bigger and arguably better than he did in his premiere during Baywatch. But why is this? And better yet, how could you replicate the same exact thing? Well, that's what I'm here to clear up for you, because surprisingly, it's really not as hard as you'd think. In this video, we will completely go over everything that Zac did to achieve the physique he has now, and more importantly, how you can get the same results with your body. The world of physique development, fitness, whatever you'd like to call it, is really convoluted, and let's be honest, there's a lot of misinformation within the industry. But I think Zac shows a realistic depiction of what needs to happen to gain muscle and enhance one's physique. With those first few pictures that leaked from his work on the set of Iron Claw, people immediately assumed drugs or performance-enhancing compounds of some kind, which I do have an opinion on here closer to the end of the video. But what I think Zac shows very clearly here is the power of a bulk, and specifically an appropriate and not so eat everything in sight kind of bulk, which unfortunately most of you watching this, or maybe you're relatively new and you haven't put on a bulk yet, have led yourself to or are going to lead yourself to. It's just a common cause in the fitness industry to people getting overweight. It's bulking as the dreamer bulk, gaining as much weight as possible the shortest amount of time in the unhealthiest fashion is usually how these things tend to go, but I think Zac shows us the right way to do these things. And for those of you who don't understand what a bulk is, or a caloric surplus, or an energy surplus, all of which are terms for the same thing, essentially what this means is your goal is to consume more energy than you burn in a given day, trying to put on a certain amount of weight each week to achieve a bigger and more muscular physique. While the opposite is true, if you're cutting or trying to quote unquote lean down or lose body fat, the goal is to eat less than you burn in a given day to support weight loss throughout a series of weeks. And I've covered before many different times why bulking is a necessity, because a caloric surplus is required to put on any reasonable amount of muscle tissue. It seems that about a 250 to 500 calorie surplus per day is something that is going to achieve someone a great deal of muscle gain without maximizing fat gain in that equation. Now, of course, people commonly like to have that really lean physique year-round, or at least want it, because it's that superhero-like physique that we see in the movies, comic books, anime, and all of it. It's highly sought after, and I think most men would agree that having that type of physique is more appealing than the opposite, which is having a little bit too much body fat for comfort. But however, like I just mentioned, when you're in a cut, you're not in a caloric surplus. So the drawback is that you virtually stand still when it relates to muscle gain. You can't physically gain muscle without the energy required to do so. And if you do, it might be newbie gains, but shortly after you'll probably lose them, as we see even in a perfectly laid out fat loss phase, about 10 to 15% of your body weight lost will come from sheer muscle itself. So what I'm saying is, while one maintains a lean physique like Zac Efron did in Baywatch year-round, they're inhibiting their ability, like he did, to put on muscle. So he looked quite lean and definitely appealing in the Baywatch, but I think he definitely constricted himself to putting on more muscle. In an article by Men's Health, Zac Efron actually opened up about this pretty significantly. He talks about his Baywatch experience and how this kind of altered his mindset around changing his physique, because he discusses how being in a caloric deficit or eating less than you burn in a day at a certain point once his body fat got so lean kept him from sleeping. He had clinical insomnia, he was experiencing depression, and most importantly, he talks about using a medical diuretic called Lasix to achieve a dry of a physique, and mentioned that it's just not obtainable to have year-round, and in fact he really didn't like the process of it at all. It definitely gave him that really dry look to do the things that he did preparing for that show, but at the end of the day it was detrimental for his own personal life. So when one is depleted from food, water, they're doing lots of cardio to achieve a physique like that, superficially it looks great, but internally everything going on around that person, they're not so great. Again, it might look very cool to be that way, and it certainly is for photo shoots, showing up at a bodybuilding show, or doing something for a sponsor if you're an athlete who is sponsored, but long term, real talk, it's not effective to keep a good habit of life, and you certainly won't put on any muscle tissue whilst being that lean. Now, transitioning in his look from Baywatch to the current movie Iron Claw, which is premiering sometime soon, his look's completely changed. He's obviously gained a decent amount of weight. I would assume that this is because he transitioned into a caloric surplus for this movie. Knowing he would have to bulk up and hold a bigger look to fulfill the role of a wrestler, he started to eat more, but in a calculated manner. And this is quite apparent because on his Instagram page, you can see he's smashing pancakes and enjoying life like a person generally should, but he has balance. And you can certainly imagine that for this show, he wasn't starving, he wasn't doing copious amounts of cardio, and he certainly wasn't using any Lasix or other pharmaceutical diuretics. So I guess one of the main points here is that being lean year-round won't get you a physique that's bigger or better by the next year. In fact, it'll keep you from being bigger and better. It might actually inhibit your life in other areas. And it might be momentarily feasible to do it for some other kind of gain in your life, whether that's a social status thing or monetary, but long-term, you wouldn't want to hold this position forever because the goal is ultimately as a human being to improve in every aspect of life as much as you can, and at some point or another, that's going to require you to increase your calories. And I would say that Zac Efron does a really good job of balancing between these two extremes, because you have the Zac Efron on Baywatch, then you have the Zac Efron which is in Iron Claw, and then you have a Zac Efron who we haven't seen yet who gets physically actually very fat, like 12 to 15% body fat, which most of you think sounds low, but that's actually quite high when we're looking at body mass index averages and stuff like that. So how exactly did he stay in that nice middle ground, bulking up enough to have a sizable physique and build muscle, but not too far to get too much body fat so that he doesn't look appropriate for a movie shooting? So having a lean physique is really important because it's appealing. I think one of the coolest things about achieving a leaner than average physique is that your jawline changes, your facial structure changes. You don't just become more attractive with your shirt off, but you also become more attractive with your shirt on. But how do you keep this, we'll call it semi-lean state, while also bulking so that you don't end up fat and less muscular? So if we look at his current pictures, some of them which have leaked in the backstages of the shooting for this new movie, he definitely looks, in comparison to Baywatch, like he's put on some water, just intracellularly, or what we call under the skin, and maybe just a little bit of fat tissue. As a professional bodybuilder and someone who's coached hundreds of people at this point to get to their lifelong dreams of a physique, my honest opinion here is that he didn't try to gain weight. He stayed really calculated. He gained weight, but effectively he only aimed to gain about a quarter of a pound to half a pound a week for about 16 to 20 weeks. The reason for this, and hopefully someone's guiding him and showing him that this is kind of the research that's out there in exercise science, but about 0.25 to 0.5 pounds per week of gain is the rate of gain in which you mostly gain muscle tissue and almost hardly any fat tissue. Gaining any more than that has a likelihood, especially in a massing phase, to put on more fat tissue than muscle mass. And in fact, if anyone gains more than about 1.5% of their total body weight in any given week, there's a great chance that more of that weight is distributed as fat than lean mass at all. So to optimize the muscle mass to fat mass ratio, we want to slow down gaining phases and try to do it as meticulously as possible. So let's say that Zac, which I imagine, just to give this a pre-frame, is already tracking his food pretty regularly. I mean, this guy is a Hollywood superstar. He gets paid for his physique most of the time. So I imagine that most of the years he's actually paying attention to what he's eating, probably tracking it and staying away from getting too hyper out of shape or hyper in shape. So generally, let's assume that he's been tracking and his calories are about 2,500 calories. His weight stays about the same year round there. He gets this Iron Claw roll that starts rolling around and knows he's going to need to put on weight for this roll. He has to play a professional wrestler who obviously is a lot bigger than he is. So we can see from the study that I posted above that about 250 to 400 calories of a surplus a day per week is effective to gain basically almost 100% muscle mass. Obviously, this is going to play out different in different individuals, but I think for the most part, this is a pretty accurate range. So hopefully whoever Zac is working with, or maybe he's just doing this on his own, knows sort of about this exercise science research because it's widely discussed out there, and made sure he stayed in a really tight range as he attempted to gain weight for the show. And there's a really important thing about gaining weight when you are attempting to do so for muscle gains. See, protein is a really effective molecule. Hopefully, if you're watching this video, you're already far more aware of this than most people, but it's going to be critical to building muscle. The really cool thing about protein, though, is it keeps your thermogenic rate a lot higher. Effectively burns more calories with the more that you consume. It's very hard to mechanically chop up and put into fat. So essentially, the more protein you eat, essentially the metabolic rate that you have goes up higher. And so one can keep themselves leaner by entering a surplus with the increase in calories being directly from protein. And worst case is that the protein itself goes to the liver, proteolysis happens, and you produce carbohydrates from that protein, which works to effectively fuel the muscle for the workouts that you're doing. So let's just say on average, he maybe consumed about 1.25 to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight in protein per day. From there, let's just assume again that he's at the starting point of 2,500 calories. He elevated, let's just say 400 based on the research that I showed. He was at 2,900 calories now. He's going to subtract the amount of calories that his weight and protein needs are going to tell him that he needs in protein, and then take the rest that he has left in calories and distribute that between fats and carbohydrate. Now, this part gets very convoluted, and I have an entire video explaining more about nutrition and how to exactly do it in the right way to build muscle or to enhance one's physique. And you can check that out in the Evangelion method video that I have. I cover this stuff for almost an entire hour. It is far better than most of the videos that you'll see on YouTube today. Now, cardio isn't also super critical thing here, and you might think that because we're bulking and trying to be in a caloric surplus, maybe removing cardio might be the best bet, but I actually differ this opinion a lot from general population. I imagine that Zach himself was doing a ton of cardio for Baywatch. When he was doing that, he had to achieve a great caloric deficit so that his physique could get leaner, he could lose weight each week. But in a surplus, obviously that's not the goal, so arguably you don't need to do as much output, which is true, but there are a ton of benefits to doing cardio when you're trying to bulk and put on weight. Cardio will keep you healthier and regulate your body's metabolism a lot more effectively than almost anything else we can do, keeping you effectively leaner whilst in a caloric surplus. Because cardio upregulates mitochondrial biogenesis, and trust me, you don't need to understand what that means, but just understand that it basically makes your body a fuel burning machine. You burn fuel more effectively. You become sort of a Prius versus a V10 Jaguar that's getting like 12 mpg. And again, that might sound like a good thing because the analogy is not so great, but we want to become fuel efficient. We want to use as much of those calories in the right place as we can, as opposed to just putting them everywhere and hoping the right things happen, because most of the time when we do that, they won't. The end result though of doing cardio year round, especially higher intensity cardio, is you get a leaner physique, and you can do so whilst eating more calories. So in Zach's case, I would imagine that he was doing quite a few steps, and this is one of the mediators of quote-unquote cardio that I like to use. And let's just say that he was following the American Heart Institute's recommendation of about 10,000 steps a day. This, for me, in my experience, seems to be the number where people get the greatest degree of body composition changes without having to do hours and hours of cardio a day. Then I would imagine that he was probably typically doing the standard Hollywood workout thing where they use the dumb battle ropes or do some other silly form of like high intensity workouts slash just ending up doing cardio anyways, which honestly is great. I myself just use a machine that's more standardized and more effective for exactly what I'm trying to do. For instance, I'll use stairs and go full speed on the stairs for 5 to 10 minutes a day just to upregulate my cardiovascular system to become more efficient so I don't have to mouth breathe all the time as a heavier guy. And I think the goal has to be set here that during this cardio, it's burning calories. That's not effectively what we want. We just simply want to improve our body's efficiency. It's how I can eat 5,000 to 6,000 calories a day and still maintain a pretty lean physique in my book. But in all, effectively, cardio is going to make you use calories more efficiently, leading to a leaner and bigger physique. The other really important topic to discuss here is the P ratio. You might not have heard about this, and it certainly doesn't have anything to do with your but it has a lot more to do with putting on muscle and how much of the food you're eating proportionately goes to muscle as opposed to fat. The first acknowledgement of the P ratio was long ago, and it talks about energy management. In 1977, two guys did a bunch of research on how to effectively measure whether someone's going to put on lean mass or fat mass. Then more people picked up on this research and started doing their own tests, and what was found out is that people dependent on their P ratio will store more fat than others. So essentially, a higher P ratio, meaning you start with a lower baseline body fat, led to a greater increase in muscle mass in an overfed state. Whereas a lower P ratio, where you have more fat mass, actually led to less muscle mass gain in an overfed state, and actually sometimes even reversed it and just gained more fat altogether. As you can see somewhere around here, there is a really cool graph displaying this, and essentially the leaner you are, like I said, the more muscle you're going to grow, especially when overfeeding, and the fatter you are, the less muscle you'll grow over time. So with this in mind, the best bet is to start a bulk or a massing phase or calorie surplus in a leaner state of being. So let's say you're in a position, you might look close to Zac Efron in Baywatch, but I highly doubt it. Let's just say you've added 10 pounds from there. That's actually a pretty good place to start. But if you're much heavier than that and you might have some body fat to lose still, it might be necessary to go through a cut prior to doing any of this stuff. And I've got a video again for this. It's the Evangelion method, and it goes over everything that you would need to know if you are in that boat. Before we continue on, I have to ask a favor for the YouTube gods, who seem not to like the whole muscle talk. If you could please drop a like, it helps me get pushed into the algorithm and lets our audience grow. Anyways, moving forward. But that isn't everything that relates to Zac's transformation. In fact, I think there's a lot more in which wasn't discussed, which is the secret sauce. As we heard him say, he was using Lasix, and he was very open about that. Lasix is a medication you cannot get over the counter. It's a pharmaceutical prescribed by a doctor. So he's obviously using illicit compounds, or maybe knows a doctor who's willing to prescribe them in use as an illicit compound. And that makes me believe that his morality behind using stuff that maybe isn't quote unquote normal to use is probably a little bit gray. It's not a secret that Hollywood stars, performance-based athletes, fitness influencers are using more than just the supplements they're trying to sell. Some of what I'm talking about is advanced drug protocols, which are used to enhance their physique or sometimes performance. Again, as someone who is behind the scenes a lot on this kind of stuff and coaches a lot of people to their infamous physique, which you may have seen online somewhere, I have some thoughts on what advanced compounds or drugs might be used in this case. And with the idea in mind that the goal wasn't to get Zac small, it wasn't to get him super lean, it was to get him big and bulked. He was playing the role of a professional wrestler in an industry which is riddled with drug use, which I personally have zero problem with. In fact, I prefer athletes use drugs, but that's a different conversation for a different day. But with this goal in mind, I would imagine that Zac was using some hormones, mostly probably testosterone. Testosterone is a normally endogenously produced hormone that our body is very well accommodated with. However, it can be used exogenously and be prescribed by a doctor. In its use, you can tend to see people have this sort of volumization of their muscles. They begin to hold more nitrogen, water, and glycogen within their muscles, so it makes them look rounder. And you can see this exact look when transitioning from Baywatch to, again, Iron Claw with the physique enhancement. Outside of this, it's possible that many of Zac's coworkers are using growth hormone, and likely he's venturing down that path too. Growth hormone is another endogenously produced peptide, but you can exogenously inject this as well. It's FDA approved and you can get it from your doctor. Growth hormone absolutely influences the angiotensin system, which causes a degree of water retention, as well as growth hormone, and specifically its later hormone that it's converted into, IGF-1, has a large potential at increasing glycogen stores within muscle tissue and expanding the sarcoplasm, or the bubbly space in your muscle that makes it look bigger. So both testosterone and growth hormone are going to help keep Zac lean as well as he starts to increase more calories and obviously aid in muscle building potential. So if the goal is to look like, let's just say, a WWE star who have a lot of history using PEDs, some of which who are open about it and some of which who are absolutely not, shout out John Cena, but you have to keep in mind he's trying to be like those guys and he needs to be bigger, so he's gonna be using some of the sauce, I would think. And one last thing is you have to know that Zac Efron's net worth is, at least as of the time I looked it up, $25 million. Each movie he does, depending on the role, has the ability to gain him 10 to 15% of his total net worth, which means almost $2 to $2.5 million a movie. So let's just imagine that you make $100K a year, and I offer you $10K or 10% of that yearly salary to get jacked or shredded. But the caveat is it needs to be done within 4 months. How far would you go? Diets, a training program, maybe the director I know's personal trainer who's on call that might have a connection with some pharmacy somewhere that has some illicit compounds you could use to accelerate the process and get even better results? I think we both know the answer. But that temptation for 10K is even more for him. You're 200xing the amount that you'd be getting at 100K a year for his salary. The urge would be quite high to get in shape with a low-risk protocol that was even prescribed by a doctor. I would find it very hard to believe Zac himself at $25 million of net worth and potentially going up to $30 million with just one movie was like, no, I don't want to do steroids. I am a good boy. Fuck that, dude. Like, the dude is getting on the sauce. If a doctor comes up to him and says, we'll write you a prescription for 250 milligrams of testosterone, for those of you who don't know, it's about 150 milligrams past what would be endogenously produced, i.e. super physiological, i.e. slightly abusive, hands him the scripts, goes to his local pharmacy, picks it up like he does, or probably actually just gets it delivered to him. I don't know how Hollywood actors go about things, but I imagine it's likely some form of delivery service, and starts injecting the good stuff within his buttocks, or maybe his jawline now that you look at it. So wrapping up all the loose ends like your grandma's gift wrapping. To get bulked up like Zac Efron, you need one to start out really lean. This optimizes the P ratio and ensures that when you do weigh in a caloric surplus or bulk, you'll be able to make sure that most of that calorie goes into your muscles. 2, you need to then eat more calories, somewhere around 250 to 400 calories plus what is your normal maintenance a day. And then 3, I actually didn't really mention this, but if you're watching this channel, you probably already understand that you're going to have to train with weights. And lastly, maybe, possibly use some pharmaceuticals if you really wanted to achieve that godlike superhero physique. There's a lot you can do naturally, but I'm never going to lie to you guys and say that some of the results you see online are reproducible naturally. So very clearly, I do believe that Zac is using some sort of enhancements as he did in Baywatch. He was very open about using Lasix. I'm sure there was some stuff on the table as he was doing Iron Claw. But I would love to hear what you guys think down below. Tell me what you think he was doing to get to the position he is now. Maybe why his face changed so much. But until the next time, I will see you in the next video. Deuces.